I'm Dan Kelcher, a solutions architect with IP Fabric. In this session, I'm going to be walking through how IP Fabric can help give you deep network visibility in just minutes. Before getting started with the process, though, I want to go through and kind of talk through some of the things that you would need if you wanted to follow through and kind of do this in your own lab environment. So the first thing is just going to be a lab license of IP Fabric. There's the URL there to go through and request a lab license. So you fill out the form, submit that, and then you'll get an email with that lab license. Second link that I've got listed here is a download page to get the OVA or QCal image. You'll get the username and password to do that or to access that download page in your initial setup email. And then the third thing, because this is a virtual appliance, you've got to have a host with enough horsepower to be able to run it. The minimum requirements for CPUs, 16 gigs of RAM, 100 gigs of storage, but the documentation page with the hardware requirements, that'll show you the different sizing and everything else that's needed. And then the final thing is a lab network that you can connect to where you can SSH or telnet into devices. So you've got to have an account to be able to do that. Only needs read-only access into those devices, or an API connection to something like a Meraki, Azure, what have you environment. And then the last thing listed here at the bottom would be our vendor support matrix. So that'll show the different platforms that we support and the data that we can collect from each one. So that said, let's get started with the deployment. So I'm actually going to go through and start from scratch by deploying an OVA. And with this, we're going to start off, give it a name, and then the sizing of it. So 500 devices. At the bottom there, it'll list what the minimum requirements are. So CPU, memory, storage, all that. The one thing I will say here, everything that I'm doing right now, this is all running on my laptop. So you can see I've got VMware Workstation running here. Hopefully, theoretically, like a production environment on an ESX server or whatever, the performance would be much better. But really, I want to show that just running locally on a laptop, I can get this up and running in a matter of minutes, collect data, and it's really easy to go through and do. So now that this is done, first thing that I'm going to need to do just to make this work with my lab environment is change the network settings here so that we connect to the right network, and then I'll start this up. So this is going to go through kind of the typical virtual appliance deployment. You go through, boot up the appliance, it'll ask for things like host name, IP address, all that stuff. Made the decision when I was going to do this video that I'm not actually going to go through and like cut out the wait time. So right now it says we've got 80 seconds to go. I'm going to wait that whole 80 seconds here just so that you can actually see that when I say out that this is quick, this isn't just a trick of editing. This is actually a really quick process. So that said, now we've got a minute to sit and wait for this to finish. I suppose while we're waiting, might as well cover that if you can see up at the top here, I've got this tab for CML. So the lab environment that I'm actually going to be connecting to is all in Cisco Modeling Labs. So there's, I think, 14 virtual routers in there. Again, everything that I'm doing, it's all running on my laptop. So the instance of CML, the 14 virtual routers, the IP Fabric instance, theoretically, production environment where you're actually hitting real switches and routers should actually run quicker than what it will against a virtual Cisco image running on a laptop. But yeah, now we're almost done with this. So set a host name, leave it with just the default domain name, set it to lab.local, set a static IP address. Get the gateway right, or the mask right, gateway DNS. So this, with the DNS, is going to be an internet DNS server just because but I don't actually have an internet connection on this box. So we're going to get a warning here that the features may not work without that DNS connectivity. This is asking if we want to re-enter those settings. Since I know that it shouldn't work, I can hit no there. NTP, I'm not going to bother setting up NTP. This is going through and basically asking if you've got a proxy connection. I don't have a proxy, I don't even have an internet connection, so I can leave that alone. This step is actually what I think is the hardest step of, of the deployment process because the password requirements are extremely finicky. There we go. So SSL certificate, I'm just going to leave this with the defaults and let this go ahead and reboot. And while that's rebooting, this will take a minute to restart. So while that's going, I'm going to hop over and I'll actually jump into my CML lab here. And for reasons I don't quite understand, this thing has a tendency to lose connectivity every so often. So we're going to restart my interface that connects to the rest of the lab. Let's see if that comes up. There we go. So that's back up again. So now, hopefully that doesn't go down again. We will 0 to 10 and then 8443. So this is the administration page for the appliance itself. So first thing that we need to do when setting up IP Fabric is actually creating a local admin account for the web UI. So that OS admin account that was created, that's the admin account for the appliance itself. This is to create an admin account from a UI standpoint. So here we log in with OS admin and then the super secure password, which hopefully I'll type in right. Sweet. And then we'll create that admin account. So username, we'll just call it admin. Email address, this doesn't actually get used, but it's a required field. So I've got admin.lab.int and then set a password here. This password doesn't have the same complexity requirements as the appliance, so much easier to do. This is also just, again, creating a local account on the box. So if you've got, once you get this done, if you want to go through and set up like Active Directory or SSO or whatever, you can do that. So now going back, so I took out that 8443 to actually log into the normal UI. I will drop in my license file and then I can log in. So now I'm logged into the appliance, and first thing to do is basically just our initial config wizard. So we're going to set our device credentials. And since I'm using CML, it's all the default Cisco. Make sure I type this in right. And then since this has enable access, I can just use that for config management. Otherwise, for config management, there's this enable passwords, but we're going to skip that for now. By default, IP Fabric is going to use the default gateway that's set up on the appliance. So the default gateway that I have is one of the routers in my CML lab. So I don't need to specify any seed devices. If you wanted to put seed devices, great. And then again, for this lab, I'm not going to exclude or specifically include any networks. I'm just going to let it quad zeros and go with the default gateway. And then the CLI settings. So you can come in here and tweak these if needed. Leave all this stuff as default and then start discovery. So with this discovery, what this process is going to do, and I'll jump back to my CML tab here. So with this, the IP Fabric instance is actually going to sit outside of this external connection. So it's going to come in, log into this router, and then start collecting data from that router. we're going to go through and do things basically to discover the other devices in the network. So we'll look at things like CDP or LLDP neighbors. We'll look at route peers, things like that, to start stepping through the different devices to collect information. So we iterate through the network. We'll connect to this first device. From here, we'll see that we've got this IR2-1 as a neighbor. Then when we go through that discovery, we'll see we've got IR22 as a neighbor. That'll then show us this PR31 and PR33. So overall, I've got to discover one device, and then that'll tell me about the second tier. That'll tell me about my third tier. That'll tell me about my fourth tier. And then finally, this PR33, that's the fifth tier. So the reason why I kind of went through and talked through that is during this discovery, because it has to iterate through that process, it's going to go through, it'll discover the first device, add the additional devices to the scan. So you can see it right now, the number of devices discovered, one. And if I scroll down here, we're starting to step through these different devices to understand what else is out there. So now it's just a matter of waiting again while so now you can see we've stepped through and we've picked up, 5 different devices there. So that should be essentially this kind of tier here. And then our next tier would be these ones. And then finally that PR33. So again, now it's just kind of a waiting game. And like I've said earlier, this is all running because it's in CML. These are all virtual appliances, all running on a laptop. In a production environment, this should run quicker. Usually we see, depending on the environment configs, the layout, you could get through 1,000 devices in about a half hour, 45 minutes, depending on the configs and everything. But this is just showing that, again, we're up to 7 devices discovered. And then we got 6 running in progress. So there should be, once these get done, we'll have one more that comes up. But yeah, in a production environment, if you've got hundreds of devices, this is going to run and it's going to connect to devices concurrently. So even though I only have maybe 4 devices per tier in a production environment where you've got more of that scale, you're going to be able to run more of these devices concurrently. So 13, we've got our last device running now. So as soon as this finishes its connections, actually what I will wait here because it's almost done. So the other thing that we can do, and I'll do this as soon as we get done here, is actually setting up our site separation rules. So in CML, I had the devices with like the different names. So IR and CR, and I think it was IR, CR, and PR. So those different devices, because those are all kind of intended to specify different network segments within IP Fabric, we can set a rule that's going to go through and take those different segments and actually build sites off of that naming convention. So last device should be done. So it's finishing up that last one now. We'll let that run. I'll jump over and show this configuration here. So in this site separation, this is where we can go through and create these rules. This is all based off of regex. So the kind of default that I like to use would just be that. So essentially, this is just going to go through and look. It's going to build a site off of the first characters up until a non-word character. So if you've got a dash, if it's like a site name dash, you know, whatever it would be, site dash device or whatever, this will just go up to that first dash and then build sites off of that. So we can save that, and then we'll go back and see. So everything is done. So it's basically going through now and building up essentially the understanding of the devices. So if I come back in here to inventory, here you can see we've got all the different devices. So I've got the different PR devices, IRs, CRs, all of that good stuff. So there we go. So it is finished collecting data. So now it's going through and building out our topology, and we're done. So that actually is usually this only takes about 3 minutes or so on my when I try and do this on my laptop. So a little slower than normal, but still we're what 15 minutes in. I've already gone through and built out gotten the deployment. I've got the configs done. I've got the initial discovery done, and we started to collect information. So now if we go through in the settings here, because I changed the site separation settings, if I update these settings from the global and then save this is now going to go through and basically take because I created that site separation rule under the global settings, it's going to apply that to this snapshot. So now it's going through and basically rebuilding the topology, taking that site naming into account. So this will take just there. It's done already. And it doesn't look like it worked. Okay. So let's see if maybe this just didn't refresh. There we go. So just needed to refresh the page. So now you can see we've got the site names are showing up here appropriately. Now just to kind of show what this does now that we've got this done, first thing, just to so sites, this is how many devices per site, things like that. Again, all those sites were automatically created based off device names, the devices that are out there. So uh, what are the different devices? How are they set up? How do we log into them? These are all virtual devices, so looking at the part numbers doesn't make a whole lot of sense. OS versions, so all of the devices are running the same OS version. This is a list of all the interfaces that we've learned through the environment. End of life, since these are virtual, there shouldn't be anything here. But if these were like physical boxes with no end of life information, that would show up here. Really, the bigger thing would be being able to look at things like site diagrams. So with a site diagram, and again, these are all small little lab sites, so we'll turn all of these on and then build this out, collapse this down. So this is going to go through and this will actually show me diagrams of all the different sites and how all the different sites are connected. So I could take one of these sites, I can change the layout, which because it's only two devices, it really doesn't matter. Um, I can come in here and I can turn off different sites. So what happens now is instead of having the exploded view with the different devices in it, it just shows this as a site because I've got the different connectivity. I can see the different types of links that we've got. I can go in and actually change the different types of displays that we run. So in here, because this network is running BGP, I can see I've got an IBGP link here. I've got EBGP down here. So I can actually see like the layer 3 diagrams. I don't have any switches in this topology, but we could do the same thing for layer 2. And then one of the really fun parts here is the ability to go through. So this 192.168.0.1, if I jump back to my topology here, that address exists up on this ER11, and this 10.130 or 131.133.2, that exists down here. So if I go and I hit submit, this is going to go through and this will actually show me what the path would take through the network to get there. So from ER11 to IR21, IR22, PR31, PR33, IR11 or ER11, IR21, IR22, PR31, PR33. We can even take, so as an example, like there's multiple paths here. So this IR22, we've got two different routes here. I could go into this IR22 if I go to explore. Let's collapse this down, bring that up. So this is going to show the decision process that was made to get there. So I can actually go in and look at the route table and see that the route table entry was added to go to that PR31. That's why that path is being shown. And the last thing that I will show here, these are the different topology tables that we have in the environment. With these topology tables, this is going to show a ton of information about the environment. Since I have BGP running, I will go under routing, BGP. This is going to show me information about the BGP neighborships that are set up. So the host device and source, the local interface, and then the neighbor device, neighbor IPs and interfaces, so the neighbor router IDs, the neighbor AS numbers, if it's an internal or external BGP session. I can see that the state of that BGP session, the number of prefixes that are being received on each one. There's also in here display settings. So there's a bunch of different like keep alives, hold times. We can go through and show all of that information that you would expect to see. And then the other thing would be being able to go in. So this would be an API call to get that information. So if you wanted to go through, and we've got other videos that kind of go through the API config of IP Fabric, but this goes through and you can collect all that information via API. So we're 20 minutes into this video. I've already got the appliance deployed. I've run a discovery. I've collected the information. If I wanted to go out and use API calls to now pull this data in and start building automation, I could do that. If I wanted to just use this from a documentation standpoint to look at the network diagrams, I've got that. If I want to look at kind of the config or the state of the environment, all of that information is there readily available. So the last thing, I think I said the last thing already, but there's one other thing that I will show, which is out of the box. These are all the different checks that IP Fabric is going to do against the environment. So looking at number of devices with the AAA setup, which in this lab, I don't have any AAA setup. Looking at BGP session age. So since these lab devices were only spun up a couple hours ago, they're all showing red here because those sessions are less than 24 hours old. Device uptime, again, same thing. They've only been up for a little while. But there's over 100 checks that are already built in to give information about the environment, how things are set up. So again, huge amount of information that you can get with 20 minutes of not even going through getting the appliance deployed, getting the discovery run. Then once that discovery is run, you can come in here. If I can click the button, enable periodic snapshots, have that run 3 times a day, 5 times a day, once a day, whatever you want to do, and then continually get that information throughout the environment. Quick, easy, done. So that's everything I had to run through. Hopefully you guys found this informative. Again, there's the lab license page. I'll actually jump back and pull up. So there's the URLs again. Take a look. If you've got questions, feel free to reach out. There's a community Slack page. The lab license page, I believe, has a link to that community Slack page. So more than happy to help out with any questions or any issues that you might have trying to get this set up. But I will say that it is as a network engineer, I've been extremely impressed with the amount of information that I can get with IP Fabric and how quickly I can get that data. So thanks for watching. Hope to catch you next time.